Hello, hello to all you young sociologists. My name is Dr. Finn Mackay, and I'm a senior lecturer in sociology at the University of the West of England in Bristol. And I feature in the A-level guidance under the broad category of feminism and women's equality, and I've written about women's equality and women's rights in lots of different areas. Mostly, I have written about feminist theory and feminist activism. And this is my first book here. It's originally called Radical Feminism. It took me a long time to think up that title, as you can imagine. Radical Feminism, Feminist Activism in Movement. I also write about gender identities and sexualities and the politics of all of that. And that's here in my newest book, which is called Female Masculinities and the Gender Wars. So that's another area of my research. It's an honor to be speaking to all of you as sociologists, students, and future sociologists. Sociology, as you know, is so important, but perhaps especially now, it's more important than ever. It studies power, it studies the workings of power in society and who power works for and who it works against. And to me, sociology is also really important because it's about how we might change that status quo, how we might change it for the better, and how humans could build and construct society and share power in a different way to what we are doing now. We need a new generation of sociologists. We need critical, questioning, political and aware and passionate students like yourselves to go on in the world, to become change makers in your communities and in the world, to go into work within the system and to put pressure on the system from outside as well. As long as the system is the way it is, we need good people in it. There's lots that I could talk to you about. I could talk to you for hours, but instead I've got to talk to you for no more than 15 minutes about my area of research and what I can offer to you, or maybe help you in terms of your work and your revision and everything that you're doing. And I suppose it makes most sense for me to talk about feminist theory and feminist activism, and particularly radical feminist theory. There's a lot of myths out there in society about what feminism is in general. Yeah, feminism is a big overall term. You'll have studied all sorts of different political movements, different social movements. They all have their own kind of strands within them. So just as within Marxism, yeah, that's a big overall category, but within that you might have people that are more Leninists or Trotskyists or Marxist-Leninists or whatever, you know, there's lots of different strands within that. And as a social movement and as a political theory, feminism is the same. So you've got loads of different types of feminists under that one category. You have radical feminism. You might have studied the big three, okay, as they're known. So that's radical feminism, socialist feminism, and liberal feminism. But there are loads more. There is Black feminism, there is womanism, there is eco-feminism, anarcho-feminism, pro-feminism, loads of different types under that broad category. Radical feminism in particular, there are quite a lot of myths out there about. Radical feminism is often seen as the branch of feminism that says women are better than men, that wants to put women at the top of society instead of men, that thinks somehow that women's culture or female culture or female values are somehow more superior, and therefore women should be put at the top of society instead of men. That is not at all what radical feminist politics and theory has said. Radical feminism is a revolutionary movement for social change to end patriarchy as a form of social governance. It is a social justice movement for equality for all people, but it is not reducible to equality in an unequal world. Radical feminism is about change, not just the changing of the guard. Radical feminism never said, let's leave the world as it is, we'll just put some women at the top instead of men. We'll just kind of turn the tables. No, that is not what radical feminism ever said. It wanted a better world for everybody. Certainly has not been working and campaigning and struggling for centuries for equality with unequal men. Radical feminism sees the world as built on structural inequalities, and it wants to change that, not just put women at the top instead of men. Radical feminism, like all of the schools of feminism, you could say wants similar things to what all feminism is working for, okay? So that's rights for women vis-a-vis or compared to men. It's an end to blatant discrimination of women compared to men just because they're women, okay? So no area of feminism supports that. Liberal feminism works within the system, but liberal feminism too says we can't tolerate blatant discrimination. We must have women's equal rights. Compared to men, women must have the same rights and the same freedoms and the same opportunities. And so radical feminism is working towards that too. How can we distinguish radical feminism then from all these other strands of feminism that I've mentioned? So I would say there are 4 different ways you can recognize radical feminism and how it's maybe differs or is distinct from the other strands. Doesn't mean it doesn't have similar concerns to feminism in general. These are just 4 ways you could distinguish it, perhaps. So one is that radical feminism believes that we are existing in a context of patriarchy. Radical feminism doesn't think that patriarchy is something you would study like a theory. It thinks it's a reality of social organization today. Patriarchy is sometimes seen as a bit of an outdated word. All patriarchy means is, do you live in a male-dominated society where all the major institutions of power in your society, so business, policing, the law, politics, the military, who owns media and culture, are all those mainstream institutions where you live dominated by men? And if they are, then that's all the word patriarchy means. It comes from the original meaning of the term. It means rule of the father. So a patriarch, you would say, was a father or a grandfather who was the head of a family. And it meant the kind of ruling patriarch, the male head of household. That's where the term originates from. But in sociology, we broaden it out to talk about male power throughout the whole of society. When we say that a society in its mainstream institutions is male dominated, and those mainstream institutions of power are male dominated, that is not the same as saying that all men are in power or all men are powerful. Far from it. All men are not represented equally in power. So when we look at our major institutions, what types of men are in power? They tend to be white men. They tend to be from privileged backgrounds, from the elite, from highly educated groups, from elite groups in society. All men are not represented in those positions of power in society, and all men are not powerful, not at all. Nevertheless, there are rich elite women in the world, in this country as well. Are they 50% of all the people at the top of those major institutions of power? No, they are not. So it's a fact, it's a statistical fact that in our country today, our mainstream institutions of power are overwhelmingly dominated by men, okay? So that would fit the definition of patriarchy. So that's number one. Radical feminism says patriarchy isn't a theory, it's how we live. It's a social governance of our society today. Number two, radical feminism, unlike some of the other schools, it prioritizes and promotes women-only leadership and women-only organization. So radical feminism would say that that's important so that women can learn the skills of leadership, all sorts of things involved in running political campaigns, being a spokesperson, doing media work, using campaigning tools. Radical feminism believes that its social movement should be led by women, by the people who are most affected by the things that we're analyzing and studying. So radical feminism uses and promotes women-only leadership and women-only organization. Number 3, radical feminism recognizes sexualized male violence against women and children as one of the keystones of women's oppression. That means one of the major forms of women's oppression. And radical feminism would say you can't analyze or understand women's position in society and women's access and women's rights without considering fundamentally women's right to life. And that means understanding sexualized male violence, domestic abuse, child abuse, rape, and sexual violence. These things are a keystone of women's oppression, and radical feminism really put those issues on the map. And I would argue was the first school of feminism to start theorizing those crimes, talking about why they happen, in what conditions they happen, and how we might stop them. Number 4, radical feminist theory and activism took that analysis of male violence against women as a keystone of women's oppression, and it extends that analysis and study of male violence against women to include the industries of prostitution and pornography. Okay, so I would say those are the 4 things that arguably we could use to distinguish radical feminism and its discrete concerns, to distinguish those from all the other schools of feminism. I'm a radical feminist. I don't agree with everything that's come out of radical feminism, but it's still the school of feminism that most closely aligns with my own politics. Radical feminism, like all, I would say, schools of feminism, we're all part, whichever bits of it you pick or choose, whichever bits of feminism you like or don't like, you make it your own. And it is a revolutionary social justice movement, one of the oldest revolutionary social justice movements in the world. It is for the liberation of women and the whole of society, based on, but not reducible to, equality for all people and for all life. And its strength is based on the bridges that it builds between other social justice movements to recognize the interconnections of all life and the shared struggle and solidarity of everyone whose interests are not served by the current status quo and the current imbalance of how power is used over people rather than for people and with other people. Thank you very much. Good luck in all your studies. Thank you for being sociologists, and thank you for being part of questioning and making change in the world.